No one religion in the ancient Near East can be studied in isolation. All stem from man's first questioning about the origin of life and how to ensure his own survival. He has always been acutely conscious of his insufficiency. However much he progressed technically, making clothes, shelter, conserving food and water supplies, and so on, the forces of nature were always greater than he. The winds would blow away his shelter, the sun parch his crops, wild beasts prey on his animals. He was always on the defensive in a losing battle. Out of this sense of dependency and frustration, religion was born. Somehow man had to establish communications with the source of the world's fertility, and thereafter maintain a right relationship with it. Over the course of time he built up a body of knowledge, of rituals that he or his representatives could perform, or words to recite, which were reckoned to have the greatest influence on this fertility deity. At first they were largely imitative. If rain in the desert lands was the source of life, then the moisture from heaven must be only a more abundant kind of spermatoza. If the male organ ejaculated this precious fluid and made life in the woman, then above the skies the source of nature's semen must be a mighty penis, as the earth which bore its offspring was the womb. It followed, therefore, that to induce the heavenly phallus to complete its orgasm, man must stimulate it by sexual means, by singing, dancing, orgiastic displays, and above all, by the performance of the act itself. However far man progressed in his control of the world about him, there remained a large gap between what he wanted at any one time and what he could achieve on his own account. There was always some unscalable mountain, some branch of knowledge which remained unpenetrable, some disease with no known cure. It seemed to him that if he had managed painstakingly to grope his way to a knowledge and dexterity so far above the animals, then in some mysterious way his thinkers and artisans must have been tapping a source of wisdom no less real than the rain that fructified the ground. The heavenly penis, then, was not only the source of life-giving semen, it was the origin of knowledge. The seed of God was the Word of God. The dream of man is to become God. Then he would be omnipotent, no longer fearful of the snows in winter, or the sun in summer, or the drought that killed his cattle and made his children's bellies swell grotesquely. The penis in the skies would rise and spurt its vital juice when man commanded, and the earth below would open its vulva and gestate its young as man required. Above all, man would learn the secrets of the universe not painfully by trial and fatal error, but by a sudden wonderful illumination from within. But God is jealous of his powers and his knowledge. He brooks no rivals in heavenly places. If, in his mercy, he will allow just a very few of his chosen mortals to share his divinity, it is but for a fleeting moment. Under very special circumstances he will permit men to rise to the throne of heaven and glimpse the beauty and the glory of omniscience and omnipotence. For those who are so privileged there has seemed no greater or more worthwhile experience. The colors are brighter, the sounds more penetrating. Every sensation is magnified, every natural force exaggerated. For such a glimpse of heaven men have died. In the pursuit of this goal great religions have been born, shone as a beacon to men struggling still in their unequal battle with nature, and then too have died, stifled by their own attempts to perpetuate, codify, and evangelize the mystic vision. To raise the crops the farmer copulated with his wife in the fields. To seek the drug that would send his soul winging to the seventh heaven and back, the initiates into the religious mysteries had their priestesses seduce the god and draw him into their grasp as a woman fascinates her partner's penis to erection. For the way to God and the fleeting view of heaven was through plants more plentifully endowed with the sperm of God than any other. These were the drug herbs, the science of whose cultivation and use had been accumulated over centuries of observation and dangerous experiment. Those who had the secret wisdom of the plants were the chosen of their God. To them alone had he vouchsafed the privilege of access to the heavenly throne. And if he was jealous of his power, no less were those who served him in the cultic mysteries. Theirs was no gospel to be shouted from the rooftops. Paradise was for none but the favored few. The incantations and rites by which they conjured forth their drug plants, and the details of the bodily and mental preparation undergone before they could ingest their god, were the secrets of the cult to which none but the initiate, bound by fearful oaths, had access. Very rarely, and then only for urgent practical purposes, were those secrets ever committed to writing. Normally, they would be passed from the priest to the initiate by word of mouth, dependent for their accurate transmission on the trained memories of men dedicated to the learning and recitation of their scriptures. But if, for some drastic reason like the disruption of their cultic centers by war or persecution, it became necessary to write down the precious names of the herbs and the manner of their use and accompanying incantations, it would be in some esoteric form, comprehensible only to those within their dispersed communities. Such an occasion was the Jewish revolt of AD 66, instigated probably by members of the cult, swayed by their drug-induced madness to believe that God had called them to master the world in his name. They provoked the mighty power of Rome to swift and terrible action. Jerusalem was ravaged, her temple destroyed. Judaism was disrupted, and her people driven to seek refuge with communities that already established around the Mediterranean coastlines. The mystery cults found themselves without their center fount of authority, and many of their priests killed in the abortive rebellion or driven into the desert. The secrets, if they were not to be lost forever, had to be committed to writing, and yet, if found, the documents must give nothing away or betray those who still dared defy the Roman authorities and continue their religious practices. The means of conveying the information were at hand, and had been for thousands of years. The folk tales of the ancients had from the earliest times contained myths based upon the personification of plants and trees. They were invested with human faculties and qualities, and their names and physical characteristics were applied to the heroes and heroines of the stories. Some of these were just tales spun for entertainment. Others were political parables, like Jotham's fable about the trees in the Old Testament, while others were means of remembering and transmitting therapeutic folklore. The names of the plants were spun out to make the basis of the stories whereby the creatures of fantasy were identified, dressed, and made to enact their parts. Here, then, was the literary device to spread occult knowledge to the faithful. To tell the story of a rabbi called Jesus, and invest him with the power and names of the magic drug, to have him live before the terrible events that had disrupted their lives, to preach a love between men, extending even to the hated Romans. Thus, reading such a tale, should it fall into Roman hands, even their mortal enemies might be deceived and not probe further into the activities of the cells of the mystery cult within their territories. The ruse failed. Christians, hated and despised, were hauled forth and slain in the thousands. Their cult well nigh perished. What eventually took its place was a travesty of the real thing, a mockery of the power that could raise men to heaven and give them the glimpse of God for which they gladly died. The story of the rabbi crucified at the instigation of the Jews became a historical peg upon which the new cult's authority was founded. What began as a hoax became a trap even to those who believed themselves to be the spiritual heirs of the mysterious religion and took to themselves the name of Christian. Above all, they forgot, or purged from the cult in their memories, the one supreme secret on which their whole religious experience depended: the names and identities of the source of the drug, the key to heaven, the sacred mushroom.